welcome to another stream. Sorry I was off last week. I had work stuff I was dealing with, but I am back. So, I probably noticed that the camera arrangement is a little different. That's because I got a request from someone on the YouTube recording of my last stream to do a stream specifically on this, the vector sequencer. Because a lot of people haven't really heard of it. It's not exactly a well-known sequencer, but I love it. So I thought I'd do a stream concentrating on it, just sort of like I did last time with marbles. Yeah. You might also notice that I have a few new goodies. My QPAS and Morphogene up here came in. I'll be doing a stream about them later on. Needless to say, I played with them a little bit, and holy cow, especially QPAS. Wow, it's amazing. Anyway, so let's get started with the vector sequencer here. Hopefully everyone can see. I think you can. So what I've got set up for this sequencer, just to test it, I'll explain really briefly, is a VCO with a VCA and an envelope that's triggering it, just so that we can hear something come out of it. It's not necessarily going to be the most musical thing in the whole world, but it's something for demonstration purposes. So, what is the vector sequencer? Well, it's a very unique sequencer that's kind of focused on chance operations and random generation. So it has a lot of different ways in which you can get it to generate sequences, evolve those sequences, shift them around, invert them, things like that. And then it also has the ability to run chance operations. So, some percentage chance to skip a step, or go up an octave, or down a third, or make a longer gate length, or turn on glide, or other things like that. It also has a lot of unique modes that I haven't really dived into yet, so I might not cover in this stream, and also modes that just got added in 1.4.0 that got released very, very recently. Those modes include a chord mode, where it can actually output chords across multiple pitches to hit up multiple oscillators if you want to, and then you can sequence a bunch of chords. And it also has some sort of drum mode. Oh, hi. Hey, Ken. Good to see you here. So it also has a drum mode, apparently, in the new 1.4 patch that I know nothing about, but I think it involves just being like basically a gate sequencer. So it should be interesting. I'll look at that later. But to start, let's just kind of go over the basics of how this sequencer works. So by default, when you have just this sequencer here, you basically have direct control over two different tracks at once, and then some MIDI tracks if you want to. There's pitch and gate and velocity for these two tracks. They call them parts in here. So if I hit like part, you can see here's 8 different parts that you have set up at any one given time. You can change the routing of these to say, like, I want part 3 to be routed out through pitch 1, gate 1, velocity 1, or any other things like that. Now, the other part to this that is definitely advisable that you can see up here, this is the jack expander. This gives you way more flexibility. So not only do you get another 4 groupings of pitch, gate, and velocity outs, but then you also have these trigger ins and outs that can be used to do things such as send clock divisions, or send start and stop signals, or it can also be used to take external gates into the system. For instance, if you wanted to clock a particular sequence by an incoming gate, but not clock as in like a steady clock rate. If you wanted to be able to have a sequence only advance when you send a high voltage to it, that's one thing you can do with it. It's pretty handy. And then, of course, the real MIDI jacks, which if you're going to sync to MIDI is fine, but by default, it has these two little MIDI outs here that just includes one of those little 1/8 inch to MIDI adapter things. So you don't have to get it if you just want MIDI, but it's great to have multiple parts out and to have the trigger ins, I find. So yeah, parts. So parts are like akin to like tracks, as you'd find in other sequencers, pretty much. So like I'm on part 1 right now. I can switch with the part control, so we'll just stay on part 1. Now each part has a few things in it. So there is a pitch control, which is self-explanatory. I hope it's the pitch. There's a gate control. Actually, I should say, sorry, there's actually second pages to most of these things, so I've got to figure out where I can put my hand so that I don't block this while I'm pressing buttons. So pitch has a secondary page of glide, so you can enable glide for a given step at a different level of glide if you want to. That's visible. Okay, cool. Gate. So gate, you can change the length of the gate. You can make it a tie if you want to have notes tied together. And it also has groove. This I haven't messed around with a bit, but very much. But it allows you to offset notes. If you wanted to make things sound a little more human, you could move this slightly offbeat or things like that. In addition, then it has a velocity track, which is essentially like an extra CV track of whatever values you want to use, right? Typically in MIDI sense, it would be used for velocity, but you can use it for anything you want, control filter level or things like that. And then it also has, that velocity page has additional CCs if you're using a MIDI out. I think there's 3 of them. Okay, yeah. Then there's the step length thing. If you want it to stick on a step, you can, for longer than an actual step, you can increase the step length to make other, weird sorts of patterns that change at different rates, even though they're in 4/4 time or whatever. It also has repeats if you want it to just repeat on a note, and the repeats act like if you have a quarter note, it's going to repeat the quarter note. That's the sort of difference between repeat and ratchet, which we'll get to in a sec. Ratchet you may have seen in other sequencers. Ratchet is like that rapid repeat. So like if I go to ratchet, you can see they're very good with this sequencer at using symbology that kind of makes sense. So like ratchet is off, ratchet is off on this. It's 2, it's 3, 4. And I think that's the max that you can do on ratchet. But yeah, so step length, repeats, I'll turn those off. Ratchet just has 1 page. So keep in mind, this is all tied to 1 part, so you can change this for each one of the 8 parts. The chance operations we'll get into in more detail later, but briefly, you have a chance type, which is is it going to skip forward? Is it going to mute a note? Is it going to move the sequence back and forth? Is it going to cause an accent? Things like that. Then you've got chance probability. If I could change one thing about this, I think it would be to make chance probability something that's not just a percentage. I wish it had the Electron style sequencer in here where you could have the chance probability be like only if the last step triggered or other interesting things like that. But considering how much work the guy who runs Five12, the company that makes the vector sequencer, has been doing on the firmware, it honestly wouldn't surprise me if something like that happened at some point. I mean, I guess unless Electron has copyrighted that or something, since that's their claim to fame. But yeah, so chance probability, chance bar. So you can actually set this to happen. So you've got originally the 50% probability, but you can say that 50% probability only applies every 2 bars or something like that to give it even more variation. And that's what's all on the chance page. And there's the modulation page. So this is really interesting. Each one of these parts has multiple subsequences in it, 2 separate subsequences and the ability to put external CV in. So these subsequences can affect different parameters. So they can transpose, they can change the octave, they can change the rate, the direction that the sequence is going, the start point of the sequence, any one of those things. And they each have an independent length, direction, and rate. So you can have your main pattern is going at a length of 8 forward direction quarter, like it says here, but you might make this, I don't know, eighth notes and like a length of 7 or something like that. So you get this weird modulation track essentially that doesn't have to run in time with the main part that's going. And feel free, if you have any questions or things you want me to look at while I'm going through this, let me know. So 2 different tracks of it. You have to enable them explicitly. But so once this is the first page there was, here's all the configuration for it. The second page is, here's the actual track. And so I can like change values in here. And I'll show you an example of this later on, just to be clear. There's 2 of them, and then the last thing is external CV in. So there's 2 modulations that you can send things in from external 1 and external 2 if you want to change like the gate amount or the probability that you're triggering one of your chance operations, things like that. 2 different modulation inputs. That's it for modulation. Control is basically all the setup for the sequence about. What does it start at? How long is it? Which direction do you want to go? How does it get reset? What rate does it run at? You can actually transpose an entire sequence I keep saying sequence because that's what I'm used to, but a part. You can transpose an entire part or move it by octaves right from this control page. That's it. And then the presets and scenes, if we get time, we'll get into. It's basically a song mode for this thing, so that you can you can more easily switch between different parts or different presets. Like a preset is essentially what you think it is. It's a saved version of a part that has notes and a length and all this sort of stuff, and you can switch between presets on a given part. And then a scene is a set of presets across all of your parts, basically. Yeah, so that was a lot of information. Let's make this make some noise. So just clear what we've got here. There's a lot of shift operations, but they're pretty well labeled. It's basically anything you see in here that's in black is a shift operation. So it's not too hard to follow. So we'll just clear this track to start, and let's start this running. So again, I have the pitch and gate. The gate is going out to triggering an envelope for VCA, and the pitch is just going to the pitch of a really, really basic, I think it's the B8 mode in this thing, the wave folding oscillator or whatever. So let's talk about the generative aspects of this. So most of these operations down here, I guess including it clear to a degree, because that is generative, I guess it's or degenerative. But most of these shift operations down here are modifications to the part that you're running. So you have the 2 most basic ones are these 2, the gen and evo. So gen generates a brand new sequence. Now, in other sequencers, you might have seen that this gets generated like truly randomly. It may conform to a scale and things like that, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. You might end up with like weird giant gate lengths that make no sense, or like a crazy ratchet that just seems totally out of place. But with this sequencer, they allow you to control which sort of an algorithm that you want to use in order to generate what you're doing. So let's just actually zoom in a bit here. Oops, not that one, this one. Feel like that light makes it hard to see. I think that's a little better. Okay. So, as I said, multiple algorithms that you can choose from to determine how it generates things. So I believe if you go into, where is it again? Not modulation. I think they've actually changed where this was in the last patch. One sec. Let's see if I can find it here. Where did they move it to? I shouldn't have patched before I came on to do this stream. Oh well. Where else would they have moved it to? I thought it was on the control page. On the second page? No. Got the manual here. I'll check for myself. Just a minute. We'll see where it is. Look at the second sequence control page. That's where I was. Where's my second page? Oh, I guess you access it via this now. All right, that's new. Anyway, yeah, so there's this, when you go into the sequence control in the second page, apparently, there's this gen setting, and this has all of these different algorithms. Oh, they even added some, actually. Cool. All of these different algorithms as to how it generates patterns. So you need to look at the manual to get a general sense of what these are. Let me just go over some of them. Basically, so the acid ones are your typical, like, acid baseline sort of sequencers. It's a 16-step sequence, 16th notes. And it says from the manual, it says a variety of pitch tones, including minor seconds and tritones. Hopefully someone out there has more music theory experience than me to know exactly what that means, but it sounds good. But anyway, so acid 1 is one of them. Acid 2 adds in glides. Acid 3 and 4, I guess, doesn't make any changes to sequencer control settings, so it must not change the length or things like that. So those are the acid ones, and then there's Berlin School ones, which is, I guess, an 8-step sequence with 8th notes and emphasis on octaves and fifths. And then there's 357, which is, I guess, is a cell-based pattern that's 3 or 5 or 7 steps long, repeated out to 16 steps. And then there's these oblique things that generate, these ones generate really, really weird random patterns. And then here's true random. There's 3 different varieties of true random. If you wanted to just randomize pitch and gate, or velocity also, or step length and ratchet also. And then there's a Euclidean gate generator, which just generates random Euclidean pattern on gates. That's it. I think it's used if you could use it for anything, but I think it's primarily supposed to be used for the drum sequencer. So let's just generate something. Let's do a very simple acid 1. So all you have to do is make sure that you're on your part and you hit Shift Generate. And let's run this again. So, doesn't sound amazing, but this is just for demonstration purposes. But you can see that it generated a bunch of pitches. It's even got like some ties and stuff in there. Didn't make any changes to groove or anything like that. Didn't add any glides because the algorithm doesn't do that. It's got some velocity changes in it, which we could patch into something a bit later. Maybe I'll patch this through the QPAS. Maybe. Yeah, so then you can get it to generate something entirely different. Right? So entirely different. Now these are all based on first the global setup where our key is set to C major, but then also here in the sequence control you can set an individual scale for each part if you want to, for whatever reason. Yeah, so let's generate a different one. Let's do like acid 2, for instance. This adds some glides. Definitely doesn't work so well without like a nice acidy sounding, like a 303. But, there it is. So let's give you some more examples. We'll stay away from acid 3 and 4 because they're basically the same. Here's a Berlin style one. Alright, let's do another Berlin style one. Cool. How about 357? This is where it starts to get weird. That actually generated something that sounds kind of cool. It's a little chip tuney with this. I wonder if I can... Let's make it... No, don't change the tuning, please. Right, and then the weird oblique ones. So hopefully you can see the lights. Yeah, you can see the lights. You see how it's advancing and speeding up through the pattern? That's because this has actually done some sequencing, I believe. Not in the modulation, but yeah, in our length. So you can see that it's changed the step lengths to all sorts of crazy, weird things, and I didn't set any ratchet, but I didn't set any repeats either. But that lets the sequencer move in very odd ways. So let's try oblique 2. Let's just clear this pattern first, and then we'll generate it again. This is even weirder. Yeah, the oblique ones I have never used. They're very... I could maybe see them being useful in some cases, because like, this is an interesting sound, I'll give it that. Like if I was to take this and throw it through some kind of delay, it could actually turn out interesting, but also like it doesn't sound like you need a whole sequencer to generate this. But you know, this is what I like about this sequencer, is it's really good at generating ideas that you can go from, better than any sequencer that I've ever used before. Lots of them have had random generation, but none of them had these like different algorithms and things like that. Yeah, and then so like then you can do the true random. This and true random. So this is sort of something that you would more typically find on a sequencer, I think. It's truly random. There's no pattern to how this was generated. If I generate something else, it won't even sound remotely like this. The only common factor is that it's 16 steps long, right? So I'm kind of curious about this Euclidean gate. I haven't used it before, so yeah, it's definitely generating a Euclidean pattern. But anyway, let's go back. Let's just go back to acid 1. Clear this, generate again. So the other aspect of this that I was mentioning is Evo. So Evo is evolve, and you can set the amount of evolution that you want. I'm going to set it to high just so that it's immediately obvious, hopefully, when I hit it. But if you do shift Evo, it will take any pattern that you have, whether it's generated or something that you put together yourself, and it will subtly change it. So it might move one of the notes up or down a step or something like that, or it might insert a tie or change a gate length or things like that. So let's see what this sounds like. So that definitely changed a note, and I think that it added a tie somewhere, it feels like. Let's try it again. Yeah, so that's making quite a significant difference. Let's try it if we do low and see if we can hear the difference. I think that literally changed one note. I think that was it. So, yeah. Anyway, so this is part of the generative stuff. The other things that you can do in here, there's a shift left and shift right. So if this pattern seems a little off to me, I can. You won't really hear it very well right now, but here, it'll be more obvious if I look at the pitch page. If I shift this, all the notes shift in one direction or the other. If I had like a constant drum beat or something like that in the background, it'd be a little more obvious. You can, of course, mute, which mutes. I know, big surprise. And then there's these other two interesting options over here, DBL and Inv. So starting with Inv inverts the pattern. It took me a bit to get my head around this, but basically, so we've got this pattern, and it's in the key of C, and the root note I think in this one is C5, because that's how we set it up in here. The octave is 0, I think that makes it default to C5. So if I hit invert, what it's going to do is look at the distance that each one of these notes that's currently in the sequence is from C5, and it's going to do that same distance but inverted. So if I was 3 steps above C5, I'm now going to be 3 steps below C5. I've found this really interesting to create like sort of counterpoints. So take this sequence, run it for a while, and then do the inversion to make a counterpoint of it, and then invert it back so that it changes back, or even have like one sequence, or one part, copy it into another part, generate the inversion of it, and then, run that through a different oscillator or things like that. So let's see what that sounds like. I think we've got, so we've got like C4. This will probably change to C6, right? Because it was down 1 octave, it'll go up 1 octave. So let's do this. So hopefully, if you were listening, you hear how like this is musically related to the last thing that we generated. If I go back to it again. Right? So it's kind of cool. Like, oh, I'm glad that my voice and sound balance is good. I thanks for letting me know. I added in a compressor this time with a bit of a slower attack to try to get it to work. On my first stream, I had a, you probably saw, I had a compressor on, but the attack was way too fast, so it sounded like my volume levels kept being all over the place. But now with a slower, a bit slower attack and a bit slower release, I think it's working better. Yeah, polyrhythms and polymeter structure is super complicated, but the Euclidean generator in here for that is actually really great. Would be great for generating polyrhythm and polymeter because I don't know exactly how it generates it in here, but if it's anything like Pamela's new workout over off screen, but if it's anything like Pamela's new workout, it allows you to create these weird sort of patterns that don't fit 4/4 and that sort of evolve over time, which is really fun. All right, so we talked about inv, which is inverting it. Then we got DBL. So DBL is for doubling. So if we look at this right now, this pattern's got 16 steps, right? We go through it, and it goes through over to 16 steps. DBL just doubles the current pattern. So if I had now, I don't think it will actually work here, but we'll try. If I had an 8-step pattern, I could double it to make a 16-step pattern. So let's just change it, because that'll be simple. So we'll reduce the length to 8. Go back here, so, oops, there we go. All right, so we're 8. Now it's still preserving the remainder of the 16 notes because we still have that information set in there, but it's only playing the first 8. So if we double this, conceivably what it should do is take this pattern that we already have and duplicate it into the next 16 or next 8 steps to make a full 16-step sequence. So let's see. Yeah. So really good if you're trying to build up a pattern, like say you like generate an 8-step sequence. You like it, and then you want to have the next 8 steps be like similar but not quite the same. You can quickly double it, gives you the second page up to 16 steps, and then I can go in and like, let's just make some random. There's some random changes, but it's like still almost the same. So. Right, yeah, so that's sort of all the generative stuff that you can do here. There's also stuff like, there's a normalize operation up here, which I believe, brings everything back to the root note that we've set here. So let's just like turn the octave down, and then we'll normalize it again. Oh, I must have that wrong. Anyway, I like it at a lower octave. So let's generate something again. Evolve it a bit. And invert it. So you can see how easy it was to generate something that's like really interesting to play around with. It's one of the reasons I love this sequencer. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the chance operations then. I'm gonna stop this running for a minute and we'll clear out this sequence so that we can start with something very, very basic. So what I'm gonna set up is a 1-step sequence. I know it's super weird, but this is actually, I've used this in a lot of the music I've done in the last little while. If I want just like a droning bass line or something like that. Simple 1-step sequence. You don't have to mess around with sending a constant voltage out of a attenuator or, some other voltage source. It's just a 1-step sequence. It'll always stay the same. There's no, and the other things you can do with that, if you have a 1-step sequence, you can go into the subsequencer, make it like an 8-step sequence, and then every 8 steps, or then like, you know, although you've got 1 step in the sequence, your actual part is playing on each one of these, and then you can make changes here if you wanted to. You know, there's a million different ways to do it. So 1-step sequence, we're just going to do a simple gate. Maybe a little bit longer so we can hear it. Let's hear what this sounds like. So this should just repeat. There we go. All right, really basic, but this is just so that you can hear what chance operations do without a bunch of other stuff hanging around. All right, so chance operations. There are a whole bunch of different types. Once you get used to the symbology, it becomes really easy to go through this. So right now, when it's set on this, it's set to mute step. So we'll just set this up so that the probability for these things is 100%. Just so that we immediately hear what it's doing. Actually, let's not make it 100%. Let's make it a little less. Maybe 50-50. Sure. So you can hear 50% chance it's randomly muting it. We turned it up to 100% just for comparison's sake here. Here's the bar thing. So you can say every bar, or sorry, not every bar. What is? Oh, I have this wrong actually. What is E? Specific bars E0348. You know, I actually don't know how this works. I've never used this chance bar thing, so I'm going to leave this for now. We'll go back to the probability. Let's turn this down again to like 50%. So we're muting. Other chance operations that we can do on the chance type. So this would be unmuting a step. Obviously, if I had an individual step muted, if I went here, I believe that I can... how do I mute one step? There. Touch the thing. It's muted. So if I change this... or actually, sorry, it's not muted. It's skipped right now. I don't remember how to mute a step. But anyway, if you had a step muted, and I'll look it up in a minute here, you could unmute it. Other things that we can do... this is skipping a step. In this case, it sounds the same as muting a step. This is unskipping a step. You can see the symbology, like, it generally makes sense. This is jumping backwards in a sequence. Not relevant in this one because our sequence is one step. This is jumping anywhere, randomly somewhere in the sequence. And this is jumping forwards. These can be really interesting, I think, in ambient. You don't really want them for anything forward-facing, I would say, because it gets... I've talked about this in my previous stream, that sometimes... I'll turn this off because it's aggravating. In some of my previous streams, that like if you let randomness take hold too much in ambient, then your brain doesn't have something to latch onto, and it just sounds like nothing. If you use the jump anywhere, that can sometimes be a problem. But jumping forward or stuff like that sometimes can be interesting. All right, so these ones aren't going to be relevant. Let's see if I can patch something in for velocity here. What do I have? Let's take a velocity, and I think this is the wave folder, so let's see what this does. There we go. Yeah, okay, so you can hear the difference. This is a random chance to do less or more velocity. So right now this is the default velocity. This is a little bit more velocity. This is even more velocity. This is even more velocity. So if you're musically inclined, you might sort of recognize that as the accent, right? Other things you can do. Here's the gate. This makes the gate longer. This makes the gate even longer. This adds a tie. They're actually supposed to have a gate shorter in here, but it actually doesn't appear to have shown up. Might be a bug I have to report. Anyway, so, and then you've got, so ties, ratchets. This can be really interesting for adding some randomness, especially to percussion or things like that. This is ratchet 2, ratchet 3, so like triplets, ratchet 4. This is pitch up. This picks a random pitch. Now the nice thing about this is that the random pitch that it picks is still quantized to the scale that you have set on the part. So, I mean, this is an example of randomness that's perhaps a bit too random, just because essentially because it's only a one-step sequence, this is randomizing the whole sequence. But you could see it being useful in certain cases on like a single note to have it just be something else in the scale at random sometimes to add a bit of variation. Then this is random shift up. So this will go to a random note, but only go up from the note that you had before. And then you can say, I want it to go up 1 semitone, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 semitones, all the way up to an octave. This is a random note down, and then I want it to go down 1 semitone all the way to an octave. These symbols are jumps. So earlier on we had these jumps, these ones right here. These are like jump forward, jump back, jump anywhere, jump back, jump anywhere, jump forward. But later on here, you get jumping to a specific step. Again, not relevant in this particular pattern, but would be in other ones. If you know that there might be a section of something that you've generated that you want to skip over and then continue in a known spot, this can be really great to sort of give like alternative endings. So if you've got a pattern that's 16 steps long, and sometimes you want it to only play like the last 4 of those 16 steps, just to have something again that the brain returns to, you can have your 8th step have some sort of chance to move to step 12, right? And then sometimes you won't get the full pattern. Sometimes you'll get just it with the end, and it will sort of restart and make things be a little bit out of time, but it can be interesting. Other things. So that's skipping all the way up to 16. There are a few other options that come in here, but they apparently only come in on the drum sequencer, which I am not going to cover because I know absolutely nothing about it. So that's chance. Let's reset this all the way. We'll just clear this. Yeah, so chance. Other options that you can do here. The CV modulation, I talked about that briefly. Basically, it's coming into one of these modulation slots, you choose a target. It's gate, step length, step repeat, number of ratchets, the probability for a chance operation, start step, sequence length, sequence direction, sequence rate. There are a whole lot of opportunities for external modulation here. We already talked about parts. I'm not going to get into chords. Other things that you can do here. So let's look at, there's also a recording mode. Now this is not what you might think it is. When I first got this sequencer, I thought that the recording mode was, let's say, like similar to what you'd get on a Digitact, where you can record like a full sequence and it's going to maybe quantize it, maybe not. But like exactly as you play it, it will be recorded. Not the case here. This has a few different modes. So the first mode is step mode, and this is basically like you can have an external keyboard, or you can use this as a keyboard here. And like, so you can see, here's all the steps. So I can start pressing notes and it puts it into the sequence. And if we go back here, it's input them into the sequence. It doesn't set gates, it doesn't set velocities, it doesn't do anything like that. It's just a handy way if you happen to be someone who is piano inclined to quickly enter in a step sequence. There's also a transpose mode. Now this can be interesting because you can do this live. So let's get this pattern playing again. Oh wait, I cleared the pattern. Oops. Let's generate a new pattern because we can do that. Sorry, I'm going to take the velocity out because that makes things sound bad. Alright, so we've got a pattern. If I'm in record mode, in transpose mode here, notice it transposed it. I can go down an octave. Now it's at octave 0. It's not going to transpose anything. I move everything up, you know, like a fifth. Or an octave. This just gives you more ability to sort of control things live, which is pretty cool. And then the other mode is just through, which is, as you might think, the notes that you play are transmitted through to this part, so I can play this like a keyboard. Surprise, surprise. I did this in one of my recent, actually it's unreleased, I still need to release it, but in one of my recent songs that I put together, I just played this keyboard. I don't have an external little keyboard yet, so I played this thing to mess around with one of the parts, and it was pretty fun. There's multiple sources that it can come from. One of the great things about this is it has multiple different methods of USB and MIDI, so it can act as a device host or whatever that other kind is. So you can hook it up to your computer and have MIDI come through it. You can hook it up to like a little MIDI keyboard. Send that in there. You could hook it up to like a 5-pin MIDI setup and do whatever you want there. Speaking of, let's just go through some of the global settings, because that has some relevance to the MIDI side of things. There's typical BPM stuff. You can set up swing. You can set synchronization to come from any number of different places. It can come from internally. You can send it through. JX is their jack expander. That's the thing that I was showing you earlier. So it come from the jack expander. It can come from multiple USB destinations. Weird. Must have been a little static discharge that just triggered something. Anyway, so multiple different sync destinations, and then you set your key and scale. I haven't messed around with this playlist thing. I think this is new. Anyway, so the next page. Each individual part, you can change the name. You can actually set the colors of these LEDs as they come out. So like we're on part 1. Let's make the foreground green, sure. And the background can be orange. Maybe a easier to see one. Cyan. So there you can see that this has changed all the colors. Makes it really much easier to like. I mean, you can look at the screen to see what part you're on, but it's much easier to look at the LEDs as everything's flashing by. And I mean, RGB's all the rage today, right? So it makes everything cool. These are the routing pages now. This is where you can set up what things are routed where. So for instance, right now, part 1, you can see is routed to pitch 1, gate 1, and velocity 1, but I could route part 2 to that pitch if I wanted to, or like any one of the 8 parts can be routed, or nothing can be routed to it. This is for CV outs 1 and 2. There's 3 and 4, which are in the jack expander, 5 and 6. The run and clock and reset things here can be set to send out different things. What is that Q thing, man? Sorry, there's all sorts of interesting new stuff in this 1.4 that it was not doing before, so cool. But yeah, run can send different syncs out or different like clock rates out, and so can the clock, and so can the reset. Let's go next. These are those triggers that I was talking to you about previously. On the jack expander guy up here, you can see there's a whole bunch of triggers across here, these ones down here. So you can set up what those are for. There's a few different modes. So right now, these are all clock divisions. So I can send like triplet 8s or dotted 16ths or quarters or, half or any number of huge other things. Or you can send out... you can make these also duplicate the gates out of certain patches or things like that. I think this is reset. So this is part 3. When it resets, send a trigger out. The gate for 3. I don't remember what ST3 is. See if I can find... Oh, step triggers. That must be like a trigger that goes out every single time a step gets progressed through. So that can be interesting. You could use one sequence that's being advanced at like maybe some weird rate, like you generated it with that that algorithm we were using where all of the step lengths were weird. So you could set it to a trigger out for the step thing, and then every single time it goes through a step, it generates a trigger, and maybe that is the clock for another sequence. Crazy. Yeah, and then the other thing that you can do with these is this ext. So this allows you to send things in. What use is that, you might ask? Well, the one I've described it before, but it could be used for clocking a sequence. So let's just set up a quick sequence, and I'll show you what I mean. We've already got this guy running. So it's running at a defined clock rate, right? If we go into control, we can set the mode. There are a lot of different options. So this mode on the rate is essentially, there's a bunch of different ways to clock things. You can have this be like divisions of the main clock or percentage of the main clock, a set speed, or like times other clock divisions. I don't remember what all of these are, but the one I wanted to mention was these modes, T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6. These are triggers. So right now we're at a 16th rate coming from the trigger. So the trigger is the clock source, but not as you might expect to, like, I don't know, clock marbles or things like that. This is more a clock source where each pulse advances the sequencer one step, which some sequencers do have. I'm thinking of like Varigate and things like that, but a lot of the sequencers that I've used in the eurorack space don't do this. So things like I've used the Fluxus 1. It tries to, so if you send an irregular pulse, it tries to calculate the clock rate dynamically on the fly, and you just get a really weird sequence going on where things speed up and slow down and speed up and slow down as it tries to adjust the clock back and forth. Or even Pam's new workout, you can't send a clock into it that's not synchronized. That's not what it's designed for. But this, if you've watched any of the videos on YouTube by especially Annie, he uses that extensively on a lot of his patterns, where like it's the same pattern, but it proceeds at different rates, and sometimes it pauses on one note for a long time and then like sort of starts to catch up and things like that. It makes things really interesting. Going back to what I was saying about your brain needs something to latch onto. That gives you something to latch onto because it's always the same or a similar sequence, but it's moving around enough that it's not moving at the same rate. So it also sounds like it's changing, and you get like different parts that are emphasized over others just because, you know, maybe it rushes through one part, or it like hovers on one note for a really long time, or things like that. So it's a really cool technique. I haven't used it enough because this is the first sequencer I've had that can do it, but let me show you what it's like, just for sake of argument. Let's see what we can see that I can patch into here. Let's take marbles, since we did marbles last time. We're going to take the T1, which if you remember from last time, right now this is in the green mode on the left-hand side, which means that it's a coin toss, and it's either going to be the T1 side or the T3 side that gets a trigger. So we should, and the bias is set right in the middle, so we should basically have a 50-50 chance of triggering this. So I've set this to T1, I patch this into the trigger, and we have to run. This is what we get. Switch the view again. Just watch the lights. I'll make this an 8-step sequence so it's easier to see. So every time marbles is triggering, it advances the sequencer one step. So again, you get that effect of it's the same pattern, but it sounds slightly different because it proceeds at different rates and that sort of thing. Right. What else can I mention here about this sequencer? We were still going through the global controls. Let's go back to that. So we have the CV outs, clock reset, JXB trigs. Here's the MIDI out stuff. This is for MIDI 1 here, and the next page is for MIDI 2. So you can set which channel do you want to correspond to, or which part do you want to correspond, and then you can use shift and twist to change the MIDI channel. So maybe part 1, we want it to be routed out on MIDI channel 1. The cool thing about this too is because the routing is so flexible, you can actually route, if we see from the beginning here. So I have part 1 being routed to pitch, gate, and velocity 1, but now that I set this up in MIDI out 1, I can also route it out to a MIDI device if I wanted to. I could route the same part out to like 5 different sets of jacks if I wanted to. So sort of removes the need to have a mult in some cases if you have the spare rooms on jack expander or things like that. Yeah, so there's the 2 MIDI outs. Then there's the USB out to the host and USB to a device, and the MIDI ports on the jack expander are addressable separately. So yeah, there's a lot of connectivity options for this thing. I have tried the MIDI sync with my Digitact. It works flawlessly as far as I'm concerned. Actually, the last track that I posted on YouTube was using that to sync the Digitact, and I went out over 5-pin MIDI rather than going out over USB MIDI, just because that's sort of what I'm used to. I'm a little old school in that way, but yeah, works fine. Okay, what else can we note about this sequencer? We've gone through all the sequence controls, gone through the globals, you went through recording, went through chance ops, went through the sequence ops. We haven't talked about subsequencers, or haven't done an example of subsequencers, so let's do that. We're going to clear this track and just regenerate another one first. Oops. That needs to be screwed in better. Whoops. All right, so generate a new track. Sounds very happy. So, what do we do with subsequencers? So, like I said, they're essentially a separate sequence that runs alongside your sequence, but can be a different length, run in a different direction, run at a different rate, and can affect certain parameters. So, to make this brutally obvious, let's make this affect octave. So you have to choose your parameter. It will by default set the min and max for you to the outlier values. So we can be up to plus 50 octaves and minus 50 octaves because, that's useful. But I think it's just if I switch to, actually, I guess they're all plus and minus 50. Anyway, but I guess you can't set the min and max yourself. Anyway, you have to switch enable to on. We'll go to the next page, and now here's our sequence. So let's make this, so we had a 16-step sequence. Let's make this something odd. Let's make this a length of 6. How about that? We'll run at, were we running at a rate of a quarter? We're running at a rate of 16th notes. So for sake of argument, let's have this run at the same rate. So 6 steps, and we'll have it, let's do a different direction. We'll have it do alternating. So it goes forward and then backwards, and then forwards and then backwards, and then forwards and then backwards. Yeah, so we'll set that up. And so here is now our sequence. It's only 6 steps, so there's no point in setting the 7th and 8th steps, but let's just, I don't know, let's take number 4 and we'll move it down an octave. I'll run the pattern a bit first so you can get a sense of what it sounds like, and then we'll add in the modification. You can also see the lights. This is the way the subsequencer works. So maybe let's go down an octave because this is generally pretty high pitched. Let's go way down. So hopefully it's obvious now. every time we hit that step, we're going down 2 octaves. And since it's running at 6, a step length of 6, you sort of got a polyrhythm thing going on again. It's not always modifying the same step. Now, if I had one wish list for this mode, it would be I wish that you could set chance operations on the subsequencers, because that would be really cool to say, like, run this other subsequencer at a weird polyrhythm and they go down 2 octaves, but have it only occur 50% of the time and only every however many bars or however that thing works. I've still got to Google that, but yeah, that would be really handy. But even so, this is already super powerful. If you look it up, there's, I'll see about adding a link to this in the video for this when it's posted, but there is a really good video by one of my idols in the ambient space for sure. His name on YouTube is State Azure, and he did an overview video of the vector sequencer. He's the one who convinced me to get it, basically, and he has a very, very interesting usage of the subsequencer, mostly for octave changes and stuff like that. So check that out. I'll try to find that and put it on the video. What sort of sequencer have you been using there, Ken? Or I know that you're pretty new to the space, but I'm curious. I'm just gonna have a look through and see what else we can do. Does that sound gets annoying after a while? Yeah. This hasn't been exactly the best stream for musical stuff, but hopefully it's still useful. So other things that we can talk about. How about projects? So projects are basically how things are stored in the vector sequencer. One of the great things about it is that it saves the project automatically all the time. I have run into with previous sequencers, oh shit, I forgot to save this, and then I powered off the system, and in true eurorack fashion, if you didn't capture the patch, it's gone forever. This is not a problem with this, which is, well, occasionally it's a problem. I've lost a couple things when I've just been in between saves or whatever, but it does save for you automatically all the time. If I go to shift save, here's the project. If I wanted to, I could change the name, etc. It's all saved to a micro SD that's inserted in the back of this guy, which it comes with, so you don't need to worry about that. And then you can also, obviously, oops, let's go previous for no. And you can obviously load a project. There's only one project in here right now beyond new project. So we're not going to do that. So the other thing we can talk about is this presets and scenes and I guess playlists thing, although I won't talk too much about that because I have not actually used it. I think that playlists are actually the song mode that I was talking about. So you use Ableton with a push, but also Max for live. Snake. Oh, yes. Okay. Similar to what Renee has. Yes. The Renee sequencer is one that I have not owned personally, but that mode always seemed really interesting for generating like non-standard sequences. So yeah, that makes sense. Something like this, you could of course clock from Ableton really easily through, well, not only clock, I believe you can send, you could actually send MIDI in through this. If you went to record mode and did through, you could have the source be coming from, USB A, and then that would make Ableton play this, but however you want to go about doing it. Well, that's cool. So you've mostly been in the box then, and you're sort of looking to get out to the modular space, I take it then. So meantime, let me make sure I'm in here. Yeah, presets. Right. So with respect to presets, basically, like I said before, they are saved copies of the length and the steps and the pitch and the velocity and modulations and all that sort of stuff for a given part. You can have up to 20 of them, but it depends on the maximum length of the sequence. I didn't mention that before, but I believe it's set in global. I'll try to find it, but there is a way to set the maximum length of the sequence because it only has a certain number. The sequencer only has a certain number of steps it can do in total, and those are divided across all the presets. So if you want more presets, you have to have a smaller length for each for the part. And if you need less presets, then you can expand the number of steps. I don't remember exactly how that is. My 10-year-old MacBook died this week. I was looking into FX. Yeah, okay. Now I'm thinking of going for some voices, still reading and learning before buying because I don't know what I what I need to start with. Yeah. Getting into modular is a really, really big leap. I got into it because I had always been into hardware, and I had a whole bunch of other hardware synths over the years, but I'm very much a hands-on person, and I've always been obsessed with dials and knobs and things like that. Resonators. Yes, things like rings and clouds in Resonester mode or whatever in the Parasites firmware. Yeah. Rings is incredible. It is very cliche, I guess, in ambient, but screw that. I don't care about what's cliche or not. I care about what sounds good. And rings sounds amazing, and that is why I have 2 of them. Because they're way too good to pass up. And like even just using rings on its own, but never mind if you feed an external signal into it and use it as a true resonator, it is really cool. You're reading the Patch and Tweak book for the moment. Yeah, I have been wanting to get a copy of that, but I haven't got my hands on it. I would, for getting into modular, I would suggest, I actually started with FX. This microburst, so this Clouds, essentially just a smaller version of Clouds. That was the first module that I got, and I just routed a bunch of my. What I had at the time was an Analog 4 that has some CV outs, so I routed the audio from the Analog 4 into that, and some of the CV outs just to be able to modify stuff, and that worked out pretty well. But I think for you, if you were in the box, it sort of depends on. Most use VST as Atmosphere and Native Instruments Kinetic Electro 2. Okay. To be honest, I'm not hugely familiar with most of the stuff in the box because I've never really worked in the box. But Atmosphere, I'm guessing, must be some sort of reverb, right? Maybe similar to that Valhalla reverb I hear about all the time. That's like the holy grail for everyone that works in the box. Which I think you can actually get a module that it's a Tip Top Audio one, I think, that has that, like that DSP for Valhalla in a card that just runs in eurorack. It's, I don't know, it's cool, but also, I mean, I guess you could just put it in the box. Oh, Omnisphere. That's a set of like oscillators and stuff like that, I think, right? I have worked with some of Native Instruments stuff before, actually. Mostly like their piano simulations and stuff like that. That is one thing I miss in this setup that I have right now is more sample-based stuff. But since I got the Morphogene, that will be coming soon. And I'm debating, and I have my Dig Attack, but I'm probably getting rid of it because I'm really trying to concentrate on just doing pure modular. So everything just like fits in one little box and I don't have to worry about syncing with other things, and it's much more portable and that sort of stuff. But yeah, in terms of, like I was saying, in terms of getting into modular, if you want to interface from in the box to outside of the box, getting something that allows you to sync and have CV out, like one of the modules from Expert Sleepers, for instance, like the Disting Mark IV that I have down here that you can't really see, but they have can't remember what it's called, but they do have a module that basically is designed for that. It's a MIDI, it's a MIDI to CV thing. It has a nice like USB port MIDI in, and then you can put out a whole bunch of different CV values from a bunch of different MIDI channels. That's one way to do it. Sort of depends on whether you want to take the leap entirely and like have everything synchronized from in the box, or whether you want to start with synchronizing from the eurorack and out. But FX modules are a good place to start because there's so many unique ones that, like Clouds is pretty unique. I don't think I've heard anything like it outside of Clouds, or like Rainmaker or other things like that. I guess it depends on what you're lacking to a degree too, in your current setup, or like what you wish you could replicate and have your hands on. Like I said, I started with FX. What did I get after FX? I actually got an ornament in Crime for, which you can see up here, this micro ornament in Crime. I got that for modulation sources, so it has LFOs and things like that. And then I got a few voices. I think I got rings and plats around that same time. I don't know. I've gone through so many modules that I don't. Hopefully it. Yes, the ZDSP. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that has the Valhalla cartridge on it. Yeah, which as far as I've heard, you need to make sure that you're getting the newer version of that, because the older version had like issues with the sound crackling, because like the DSP algorithm would like run out of RAM or something like that. So be aware. And it's also a pretty expensive one, so consider looking into how the modular secondhand market works where you live. That's been one great thing for me, is I've gone through so many different modules over the last, how long have I been doing this in modular? 2 years, year and a half, something like that. But their resale value is usually at least minimum 70%, if not more. And often people will do one-to-one trades for modules they're looking for, which is great, because it means that like even if you screw up and get something you don't necessarily like, you can you can recoup most of your costs and put it back into something else. So yeah, look into that. Anyway, let's get back to these presets here. But we'll keep talking with you as you keep having questions in here. So the other preset, so we're going to talk about presets. Basically, they're sets of pitches and gates and velocities and other settings on a given part, which you can switch between. So I can, like, right now I'm in A01, so this just has a single pitch in it for some reason. It must have been messing around with this. And I can switch to A02. And this has the previous pattern we had. Scenes are collections of presets applied to a bunch of different parts. So you can see, we'll switch back to the better view here. We've got 8 parts. They're all in different scenes. So let's just run this. You can rotate this to change. And you'll notice that it changes in time. So this is really handy if you want to like queue up another part. You change. It'll wait until the bar changes over, switch over, and you can configure how that works. You can make it trigger immediately, and I think you can configure where in the bar it switches over. And then, so not only can you, here is a very good control point to individually change what preset is running on each one of your parts, but then you can switch to an entirely different scene if you wanted to. There is no scene in this slot, but if you wanted to change all the parts simultaneously, you rotate this encoder. You're now on an entirely different scene setup, which is handy, but admittedly I have not used it yet, simply because I don't think I make things that are that complex necessarily. But if you wanted to use this as like a song mode kind of thing, you could totally run it that way, no problem. So much better than something like the Dig Attack, for instance, because there's, you have to set up all these chains and stuff like that, and there's no real, doing something like this all at once is a lot harder to do. The other thing that you can do, if I can find it. This is the presets. Get the scenes. Oh, I forgot to mention too, when you're in scenes, there's a Q button that you actually hit in order to send this forward. So like here, this is Q. So now we're in part 2, and I can queue up part 1. And again, you can change how this gets triggered, whether it's on the bar or not. But that's a really annoying pattern. Let's just generate something else so that we're not listening to the same thing while we are going through all of this. So the other thing that we can do is the playlist. So if we're in preset, we go previous. So playlists are this setup here with a play for and then go. So you can set it up so that you've got, like, here's our preset A02, which you can name, of course, and change the numbers on where it sits in the numbering sequence. And then you can say, I want this to play for 4 bars, and then go to another sequence. In this case, it's actually loop to A01. Oh, it's like goes to A01 and repeats so many times, or it goes to itself, or it goes to a different pattern, things like that. You have to explicitly enable this thing, which is what I was showing earlier here on this playlist setup. If I switch this on, then it's playing to this playlist. So it's essentially similar to what you could do in a Digitact or whatnot to chain things together. Again, I haven't used it because I haven't created anything that's that complicated, and I think most of my more complicated stuff, I'd rather have it be randomly modulated than have this sort of preset setup. But I could see how it would be useful if I wanted to create like a much longer sequence. Just haven't done it yet. What else is there to mention? We already talked about external sync. Let's go to the dashboard. So this is another thing that's in here. If you press part, so this is your part selection, and you hit next, you end up on this thing they call the dashboard, which essentially allows you to edit 8 parameters at a time for a single part, which sounds pretty crazy. You basically turn this encoder here. And so right now it's set on changing the start time, changing the length, changing the direction, changing the reset, the rate, the mode, the octaves, the transposition. So now I have like total control over all 8 of my parts, and I can make changes to them all in one place very easily without having to go into each part and change it, and then go to the next part and change it, and go to the next part and change it. There's 3 other parameters on here. These Chen SCL, Vel SCL, and Gate SCL, which are all about scaling. So you can scale the gate values, you can scale the velocity, or scale the percentage chance. Anywhere from 0 to 100% essentially. So again, I haven't messed with this side of things myself, but I can see how this would be immensely useful in live performance. So and I think that about covers the sequencer, really. It's more like the Akai MPC workflow. I honestly have not worked with that to know, but I will take your word for that for sure. Yeah, like I said, this is really my favorite sequencer that I've worked with, even though it is quite large, as you can see. It takes up a lot of real estate, but it also does a lot of things that I needed other modules to do in the past, like a lot of the randomization stuff I just couldn't do, but like transposition or stuff like that. I don't really need to, for instance, buy a Beast chalkboard or something like that to transpose sequences up or down octaves or things like that. I can do that in here on its own by either creating a new part and changing the transposition, or I could create a subsequence where the transposition changes at appropriate points. It's a lot of functionality all packed into this thing. Do you have any questions or things that you want me to go over there, Ken? Since you are the main other person here, I believe. Actually, I do have a few other people that are in chat, so that's cool. You know, that went a lot faster than I expected it to. It was only an hour and 15, and I've got 2 hours for this stream, so we can just start experimenting around. I can patch this into QPAS, maybe. Let me, while you are responding, patch this into QPAS. If you can't tell, I'm very excited for that module. Let's see if we can get a better view. Just a minute. A little bit blocked, but it'll work. QPAS is down here. I might do something more in more detail on it later. Needless to say, it is a stereo filter that does all sorts of weird, freaky things. So from what I have experimented with it so far, it is great for creating like weird stereo landscapes. So let's do that. I need a longer cable. All right. Just gonna patch this all together. It's also great for making something that's mono into stereo. Let's do something weird. Let's take the low pass on one side and I don't know, smile pass on the other side. I don't know why they call it smile pass, but it's a notch filter. Let's get a sequence running through this. We'll just set this on like pretty much defaults with no resonance. I also did not realize that QPAS has a built-in VCA, which is super cool. All right, let's run this weird sequence we had going. Why am I only getting it in one ear? Oh, of course, because it's a low-pass filter. That's fine. So it's already got some interesting stereo spread here, but if we start messing with the radiate, we might not get a huge amount of this because it doesn't actually have that much actual frequency content to deal with, right? So we're not filtering a huge amount out of it. Let's give it some resonance. You can sort of hear the weirdness that it's doing, and then if I start sending a gate into this, I love these inputs. I don't know if you can see that, but they're like double exclamation point upside down, and they don't describe what they are, but they do weird things. Like I think this one like pings the filter or something like that. Yep. Let's make some pew pew sounds. This one, the other side does something that's a little more subtle, I think. Let's put some reverb in this because this is an ambient channel and it needs reverb. You were looking to the Make Noise tape machine. Oh yes, the QPAS is part of that, and I believe also the mimeophone, which I've been really interested in, but I have also heard that it has some weird issues on some of them with input levels. Like people have had a lot of clipping and like distortion happening, which sort of is scary to me because it's not a cheap module. All right, reverb. Now that sounds ambient. She sounds pretty sweet. I almost wonder if it would be better to send it directly into the reverb and then filter it post reverb. I don't know. Certainly, I would want less mix. Let's do something like that. All right, let's maybe send some LFOs into these radiate values. It's already doing some interesting stuff. Oof, Too much resonance. When they released that tape machine, I was really interested in the idea of it. I mean, I've used a bunch of the modules that are in it, but I would need to get more used to the morphogene. I used to have a morphogene a while ago. I used to have a morphogene back when I first started, and for advice, Ken, do not make the mistake that I did when you are starting out. Even if you have the money for it, do not buy like 10 modules at once, because you won't understand any of them, and then you'll sell ones that later on you'll be like, oh, why did I sell this? Morphogene, case in point. I didn't understand it at all. I didn't get how to work with it. I didn't understand its point. I mean, admittedly, I maybe still don't entirely, but now that I've spent more time in the modular space, I think I get more of what it's about and can actually appreciate it better. I think that's the case with a lot of Make Noise modules. They are not intuitive. Like the tail harmonic, if you don't have which is what I have going on up here, and I've used it in a few patches before. If you don't have the module or the manual for that, yeah, you're gonna make stuff that does not sound good, and you'll have no idea how it's working, and you'll be frustrated, and you'll probably try to sell it. Yeah, it has those problems. They're not, much as Make Noise is super popular, I do not think they are good beginner choices because, yeah. Alright, what else can I do with this? What if I put another LFO into the filter frequency? This thing has 2 filter frequencies, and I think it's because it's like it's got 4 separate filters, 2 for each, 2 for left, 2 for right, and so you can control the frequency of each one edge of them, which is like the radiate control says how far out they are from each other, something like that. Like I said, I still need to get used to this, but let's see what this does. Maybe. That's interesting. I wonder if I take something else, like the high pass. Let's see what you say. It does quick if you want to use an outboard mixer. Oh yeah, so quick one. If you want to use an outboard mixer from modular, do you need a modular mixer to send out because of the voltage differences in line level? It depends on the mixer. So stuff that comes out of modular is, as you probably realize, they're extremely hot. It's very high line. It's higher than line level, right? Or is this line level? I don't know. It's really hot anyway. So some mixers can't handle that. Some can. It's tough to say. I personally route everything out through an IntelliGel module out here, but that's because my case has built-in 1/4-inch jacks, so it's an easy conversion, and it's easy to control the levels and stuff like that from just from this knob rather than having to adjust them anywhere else. I mean, I guess I could just adjust the master knob on the mixer here, but lots and lots of people do that and use an outboard mixer. I went with the performance mixer because it's number one. I travel a lot, and I want this all to fit together into 2 cases at maximum and not have to have a bunch of external hardware. And number 2, just because it's interesting to be able to control some of the mixer parameters with CV, like control the aux and amounts with CV or things like that, which you can't really do in a typical mixer. But yeah, like I said, it depends on the mixer. You don't necessarily need to. The bigger thing where it really matters is guitar pedals. If you look to use external pedals or stuff like that for effects, I would highly suggest you get something that converts from modular level down, because a lot of guitar pedals cannot handle that amount of signal and just start to distort, and like sometimes that makes a cool sound. But I remember when I first hooked something into a pedal just to see what it sounded like, I thought that it was like, I'm like, this sounds like garbage. This pedal is broken. Like, what's going on? And then I hooked it up to a guitar, and I'm like, but it's not broken. What's going on here? So, yeah, be aware of that. Yeah, and you said you're tempted by a bunch. You're more like less is more. Yes. And you're on disability because of your illness. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, of course. I'm happy to have other people here watching and whatnot. It's nice to talk to people. That's part of the reason why I started streaming this. Is I don't have many people in my area who are interested in modular. So it's good to be able to connect with other people that are. But yeah, yes, less is more to start for sure. If you are anything like me, the gear acquisition syndrome bug will bite you, and it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle. Black Friday did not do anything good for me on that, but hey, I got a QPAS and morphogene out of it, so I wanted to experiment with, since QPAS essentially splits the signal into all these different outs. If I take one of the different filter outs and send it somewhere else and do something else with it, what else could I find? So if I don't know, high pass, well actually, not into the lo-fi junkie, that doesn't make sense. Lo-fi junkie is a filter in and of itself. Where would I send this? Maybe into the resonator for rings? Let's try it. I don't know if high pass is going to be the best choice here, but oh man, I'm going to start needing longer cables in this case. We need to go into the in for rings. And let's come out of one side. Just mute the other channel. Oops. Oh, of course I need to mute the aux. Did we get anything out of this? Oh, the brightness. Let's see if we can get anything interesting here. I don't think we're going to get anything interesting out of this. Maybe, what about... Yeah, I don't think this sound's going to work great through the resonator. Let's send it into the black hole, the SP then, which I'm considering getting rid of because I'm still not sure I'm happy with it. Let's pick a different patch, because that was on the, I think, the drones we were doing last time. It's too hot. It's kind of interesting. Does it blend with the rest? Maybe. I think it's a little subtle. It's getting lost. What the smile pass? Low pass on the other side. Am I sending this into reverb? No, I'm not. So that's... I turn down the reverb a little, maybe it will... That's actually kind of cool. It's an interesting delay. So I've got like essentially a delay running on just the high pass section of the signal, which that's kind of neat. Like I said, I'm still playing with QPAS. I haven't discovered or figured out everything about it yet by any means. let's maybe do something with the vector sequencer with this. So we got this pattern. What else can we do? We could set up the velocity, which I think is, it's not really been randomized yet, but let's make it into something like akin to a ramp in like spots. What if we send that into the weird exclamation mark thing? See what that does. Sort of makes for an accent sound, I guess. Yes, you're talking about this sound, right? Definitely more in the background. I debate whether it gets lost when you add in the other reverb, but not quite. If I keep the volume down just low enough on the reverb that it's not really triggering too much, then you can still hear the delay in the background a little bit. Don't really like it into there. What about into resonance? Oh, that's a little out of this world. What about this second frequency? I feel like maybe these other values need to be set to 0. I don't know. It's better when it was a little more subtle here. We'll just go into the right side rotate. Oh, I forgot the other thing about QPAS, I guess, is that the level, you can like overdrive it. So at this point, the level is overdriven, and it doesn't like overdrive like crunchy overdrive, but it fattens up the sound. But I guess at like 2 o'clock is unity gain for this. I don't know which sounds better. Let's listen. That's a unity gain-ish. I think I like it better just fully overdriven. Yes, okay, you did, yeah. I like where this is going. And I feel like I wish I knew what I could do with Morphogene now, because I feel like taking this and shoving it into Morphogene and messing it up and granularizing it and playing it back at weird rates would be cool, but I don't even have it powered yet. I haven't had the time to dismantle my case and put the power back together, which is always one of the joys of eurorack. This needs a bass, so let's do a drone. So I can switch to another part 2. I'll clear the part, and I will make part 2 length of 1, so it just repeats the same note over and over and over again. I'll set it to like C3 maybe, and turn on gate, and let's patch this up. We'll go, what could we go through to do a nice drone-y drone? Guess we could just try Platts. So this has been routed into pitch 2, gate 2. We don't really need a gate, so I'm not sure that Platts is actually tuned, but oops, we'll see, won't we? Well, it's tuned way too low if it is tuned. definitely not tuned, I think. Needs to be like down, right? Sort of works. There's my multi-waves. Here we go. Oh, wait, here we go. Let's take the root node out. So this is... Oh, actually, no, we're in wavetable mode, not chord mode. Interesting. I've never actually used this mode. Maybe through Lo-Fi Junkie. Give it a bit of movement. A little too much movement. Bit of speed down. Still not. The tuning is off. That's actually not too bad. It's a little too forward, but it's all right. Instro also has a tape delay module like the Morphogene coming out that looks interesting. Yeah. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, I'm sure. Arbar. Yeah, I've seen that. It seems like a really, really classical, like it doesn't attempt to do... Morphogene is kind of like abstract and weird and calls things by weird names, but Arbar, from what I've seen, seems to be like way more concentrated on just like this is essentially a virtual tape. Here's all the usual controls that you would see on a tape, treated as such. I actually am in the process of trading for a Instro CSL, which is going to be my first really complex oscillator. Well, I guess Telharmonic's pretty complex, but CSL is huge. Which I'm really looking forward to playing around with, especially given that it's multiple oscillators in one. They make some really interesting modules, those Instro guys. This will actually be my first module of theirs, but I've looked at the demos of it so many times. They don't sell them up where I am right. Well, actually, no, sorry, I should correct myself. They do sell them here, but at the usual massive markup, so I haven't got my hands on any one of them. Let's do something else to this thing here. Let's do a little evolution and see what that sounds like. First, I'm going to set the evolution to be medium. Here we go. Subtle change. I do wish one thing with this sequencer, it would be really nice to be able to have the trigger inputs from the jack expander trigger evolution or trigger shift left or trigger invert or things like that. Speaking of which, let's try invert. I think one of the ideas I'm going to have to mess around with at some point is this inversion concept and having one part that's uninverted, the other part that's like inverted and maybe like octave shifted down once and sent to like a bass oscillator as like a following bit of bass. I don't know, it might be interesting. Maybe I'll try that with the CSL. That would be a good test. And I also have to test chord mode on this thing with the CSL. I've not touched it at all because I don't really have anything right now that's great for chord generation. I mean, really, if you don't count the Distinct Mark IV, because it can be used for so many things, I really only have 5 now with the Morphogene voices in this system, and not all of them are in use at once, that's for sure. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way this QPAS is making things sound. It's very different. I was a bit worried when I was first getting it because, you know, whenever people rant and rave and are like, this thing is the greatest thing since sliced bread, it literally makes music itself, you know, that sort of stuff, I'm always like, really? But I'm pretty impressed so far. Out of all of the Make Noise modules I've ever used, it's one of the simpler ones to comprehend, I think. Yeah. I'm just thinking what else I've used. I've had a maths, but I got rid of it because it was, I don't know, everyone rants and raves about this. Maths is one of those ones that everyone's like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it can do all these things. And I mean, yes, it can, but it's pretty complex to try to figure out. It's huge. I could do some of the things that it does in other modules already. I don't know, it didn't do it for me. I found myself using it in like occasionally in patches to like generate an envelope or like something that was like really not doing it justice. So that went a while ago. I don't like that bass. And I've left it go for a while. This is a lot of how my music process really works too, is I let stuff sit here on repeat and then I realize something is not working for me. So let's actually see about trying this invert thing. That's it, you're unfollowing. Why? Because of my Make Noise comments? And hi, by the way. It's good to see you here. I'm gonna try doing what we were talking about here. You've been lurking. I appreciate it. I gotta figure out, there is a way, I believe, of copying and pasting between parts. But you can copy and paste presets between parts. Cool. Well, yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, Nightworks, who's in the channel, has an awesome channel on his own, but then has links to a bunch of other modular artists that are on Twitch, which is really cool because I had real troubles finding anyone else. So check him out. Especially check out his channel page to find a whole bunch of other people like me. I don't know that many of them are doing ambient modular, but they're definitely doing modular, which is cool. Alright, so let's see about copying and pasting this. It says that I can copy and paste presets between parts as long as the destination part has the same sequence type and size as the source part. Right, okay, so hold shift and press select and it copies the preset. Select. Oh, select on here. Oh, select. Shift, select. Okay, so that supposedly copies it, and then I can go to like part 2, or I guess part 3 maybe? No, I can go to part 2 because I wasn't going to use that bass line anyway. And I'll clear. And And to paste, I hold shift and press skip. Alright, that didn't work. Let's try this again. Part 1. Shift select. Or do I have to be in another view? No, shift select, supposedly copy. Part 2, shift skip. That is not working. Maybe I need to be in the preset view. Can I go shift select? Ah, yeah, there we go. Okay, so now I copied it. Now I go to part 2. Oh, wait, no. Part 1's A02, shift select, just copy it. Part 2, shift skip to paste it. Okay, so this is probably going to sound like garbage, but yeah, but I did paste it. Let's try putting this in rings instead, for sake of argument. Maybe it will sound more interesting, more productive. It's probably a little more in tune, maybe. Let's see if I can get this to sound even remotely in tune. I probably need a gate actually too, because otherwise it won't be strumming rings. Interesting. Why is it? I feel like it didn't. Did it copy and paste the right part? C, G, F, D. Yeah. Yeah, everything's there. Okay. So let's change this. Oh, it's transposed up 12. Why was it? Sounds good. So then let's invert this. I really need to tune my rings. That's always a problem with this. Conceptually, I could see this being interesting. What about if I stick this instead into the right input of that delay? Just listen to it on its own for a minute. Oh, of course, we'd need the right out from this too. Let's repatch this so we can hear the right out. This number 7 does not need to be going to reverb. Whoa, that's a little trippy. It almost makes like a phasing effect because they're both being triggered at almost exactly the same time in like inverted notes. I don't know if I like that, but what does it sound like in context? It's kind of cool. Let's evolve this pattern. I guess I have to evolve it on 2 parts. I can't do that simultaneously, but let's evolve part 2. Oh, right, and if I evolve them, they're going to evolve differently. That's actually kind of cool because you get these two patterns that are counterpoints to each other, and then they change in slightly different ways in different points. Oh, now this really makes me wish you could trigger evolution at a random point in time. Oh, man. Oh, this is sounding really good now. I like this. This is the first time I've actually used the black hole DSP2 with the delay because, like I've said in past streams, the delay can't be synchronized, which is, I don't know why they decided that, but it's actually working okay here. I wonder about adding some. No, we definitely don't want any bit crash on it. We're already full wet, yeah. This needs morphogene. This needs a nice sample, like a nice spoken word thing or something like that. And it needs a better bass line, which means I need to tune my plats. Maybe a next stream I'll just start with, because I've only ever seen, I don't think I've ever seen a video on this, but I'll maybe start with how do you tune rings, because rings is a giant pain in the ass to tune, because you can't, like, unlike a lot of oscillators where you know, like plats, I can get a solid single sine wave out of plats and tune it from there. Like, it's not too bad. Rings, you have to have it in a very specific setup in order to be able to get something that you can tune with like a oscilloscope thing or whatever. You can tune it by ear sometimes, but yeah, there's a specific set of settings. I think it's actually another guy to look up on YouTube if you like this ambient stuff, Lightbath. He's crazy good at what he does, but I think that he had a document on how to tune rings. Check out his YouTube channel, and I'll see about next stream, which, by the way, my next stream will be on Wednesday. My plan currently for streams is Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, hopefully, at around the time that this one started, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and then on Saturday at somewhere around 10 a.m. For all you EU folks. Yes, it's getting early in the morning in Belgium. That's cool. I don't blame you for trying to go to sleep. Like I said, my streams on Saturday will be more your time, because I think 10 a.m. here is, what, 5-ish UTC, I think. So, yeah, those should work out better. Yeah, I think with that, I may close off the stream for tonight. I really like where this is sounding. I might start with this on Wednesday, and maybe we'll look at the maybe we'll first tune rings, because that needs to be done, and then we'll see about adding morphogene into this and see if we can get anything really interesting going on top of this, because I really like where this is going, but it's not there yet. Yeah, so thanks everybody for sticking around. It was actually really great to have all you people in chat. Yeah, and if you have any suggestions for things that you'd like to see me stream about, or try, or do, or whichever else, let me know. Send me a whisper on Twitch, or this will be up on YouTube, so leave a comment on the video. Yeah, I'll leave you with the sounds that we created here for a little while, and then I'll stop the stream. So thanks again for dropping by. Appreciate it. And I will see all of you, hopefully, on Wednesday. Take care. Oh yes, rating. This is a good point. I keep forgetting about doing this. Let me see if I can figure out how you do that. Okay, I think I figured it out. Sorry, it's on another screen, so I'm waiting to see. Here we go. We're gonna go raid Moonhouse AV Department, who, yes, I've looked at some of his videos and his previous streams, and it's been awesome. So off we go over there. Enjoy, everybody.